We love the Second Amendment. We love guns. This is Florida. I totally get that. But there was a recent case where there were some challenges to the application of the Second Amendment. Folks, we have this written document from many years ago called the Constitution, and it says, look, in the Second Amendment to it, it says we all have the right to bear arms. Now, the question is, how strong is that right, and how far can you take that right? So this recent case of the United States versus Dubois talks about how far can you take it, because Dubois was convicted and sent to prison for possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. And what he appealed was, he thought that this scheme of punishing convicted felons for possessing a firearm, which should be a Second Amendment right to all citizens, that is unconstitutional. Now, you look at Dubois, and yes, he has a prior felony conviction, but he paid his dues. He's not on probation. He's not under supervision. It's done and over. It's all behind him. He says the Second Amendment should apply to me. I should get to bear arms. I've paid my penalty. And he files this appeal because he was convicted of possessing a firearm as a convicted felon after he tried to send a bunch of guns via like FedEx or UPS to the Commonwealth of Dominica. That is not to be confused with, it is an island, but the Dominican Republic is up by Cuba. The Commonwealth of Dominica is like down towards the Galapagos. It's way down. If he had watched my videos, he would have known that everything about this package was going to send red flags. The addresses weren't quite correct. The names in the addresses didn't quite match the destination name and address versus the return address, name and address. Like, none of this clicked, and it immediately sent red flags. And that's why we're talking about the case, because the man got sent to prison for possessing these firearms. What he said was that the way that this law is unconstitutional based on a couple recent decisions about the Second Amendment, decisions that strengthen the Second Amendment rights of most citizens. And he starts his argument by saying, if you look at the Heller case, the United States Supreme Court back in around 2008 stepped in on behalf of the Second Amendment, right? Stepped in to Washington, D.C., because in Washington, D.C., the lawmakers decided to declare handguns illegal. No citizen can possess a handgun in their home or anywhere. They were banned. And the United States Supreme Court stepped in Heller and said, have you guys not read that old piece of paper and the Second Amendment to that old piece of paper? It is perfectly legal to bear arms, even a handgun, and they threw out the Washington, D.C. law in Heller. And Dubois is also basing his appeal on a very recent case of Bruin. That's Breun. Now, Bruin addresses another issue that attacked the Second Amendment, and that is in New York, they decided to make, if you wanted to carry a handgun with you, they said, we're going to put quite a few limits on it. You have to tell us what your special need for self-defense is. And if you have a special need for self-defense, and again, in Bruin, the Supreme Court stepped in and said, what, have you guys not read this document? We have a Second Amendment. We citizens have a right to bear arms. You cannot decide that they have to come up with some qualifications, because when you read the Second Amendment, it doesn't say you have the right to bear arms, but only if you have a special need for self-defense. It doesn't say that. The law was struck down. That was unconstitutional. With that backdrop, Dubois says, what about me? I've paid my dues. I was convicted of a felony. I'm now an upstanding citizen, and you guys are hitting me again for the crime of possessing this stuff, when in light of these recent cases, the Second Amendment is pretty strong. Court is not buying his argument whatsoever. Look, folks, the lesson learned in Dubois in a lot of these cases, when it comes to the Constitution, there are strings attached. How many strings? That varies. But in Dubois' case, they were very clear. We have a long-standing policy in the United States that if you are either mentally ill or if you are a convicted felon, the Second Amendment just doesn't apply to you. Sorry, you cannot possess a firearm. And Dubois lost his appeal.